Hello and welcome to the Books Uncovered podcast, a podcast brought to you by Fulcrum Publishing, where we explore the world of books and the people who make up the publishing and the book industry. I'm Sam Shinta, publisher of Fulcrum Publishing, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, Kateri Kramer, Fulcrum's marketing director. Hi, Kateri, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing well, thank you. How is this late fall, early winter in Denver these days?
It's been good. It's been very busy. I can tell that people are anxious for Christmas. And we're kind of feeling the same way in the office, just getting books ready for spring and stuff like that. But everything's pretty festive, which is nice.
Yeah, this is certainly the exciting time of the year because you've got year end and wrapping everything up. And yet it seems everybody wants to hold meetings over the next 10 days before the holiday. I just have to keep reminding people that there will be a 2023 and we can easily get together there as well. So,
Exactly.
yeah, well, fun times. Well, this is going to be an exciting conversation today because unlike our past podcast where we've just had one guest, we have three guests with us today. I will introduce them here. Julia Callahan is the independent bookstore rep for the Western United States for Independent Publishers Group. She has worked in independent publishing and independent bookstore events and has been in the book business for 15 years. She also co-wrote the book, I Remember Everything, Life Lessons from Dawson's Creek, and co-hosted Dawson's Critique, a Dawson's Creek rewatch podcast. She's never met a free bourbon she's said no to. For 15 years, Jeff Waxman has worked in bookstores and libraries, online, in classrooms, bar rooms, restaurants, and in the streets to connect indie book publishers and smart magazines with readers and bookstores all over the world. He's currently the East Coast rep for Independent Publishers Group, serving all the best bookstores from Maine to Florida. He lives in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And last but not least, Chris Conti earned an MFA in photography and then fell into a career as a book buyer, who hasn't, for two contemporary art museums in the Midwest. He spent over 7 years representing Faden Press to 20 states in the middle of our country. In early 2021, Chris built the first in-house trade sales team at Independent Publishers Groups for their 50-year history, where he sells to independent bookstores in mostly the no-coast states of the Midwest. Chris hosts the John Cage Bubblegum, a weekly radio show streaming at radio614.org, and is based in Columbus, Ohio. Welcome, all of you. What wonderful eclectic biographies there. And what typical book publishing industry biographies, right? A little bit of everything sprinkled in there. But what ties it all together, a passion for books. So for our listeners out here who don't really know the role of these independent bookstore reps, what is it that you do?
Yeah, all right.
So it's a little bit different at IPG being a distributor, I'll say. And so what we found is that we're really combing through thousands and thousands of titles from hundreds of publishers. And because we sell just to independent bookstores versus, mass merch accounts or Amazon or just other distributors like Ingram, we can really handpick the titles that we think are going to have the best legs for indies. We really get to comb through and choose the best of what we're doing.
I mean, one of the things I always loved about being an independent bookseller was that I wasn't particularly beholden to anybody for like the books that I was going to get behind. I'd read something, I'd fall in love with it, and then I would sell that book like all day, all week, all month. You end up building up like a kind of a repertoire of your favorite titles that you'll recommend to people over and over again. And I've worked for small publishers, Julia has as well, where sometimes, you're maybe working on like 25 books a year and you may love them, you may not. But with IPG, we do have an opportunity to, as Chris said, find all of the things that we think will work the best. And we get to pitch those books as hard as we want, as hard as we can. All the year long, and it's much closer, I'd say, to being a an indie bookseller than to being in-house at a publisher.
Yeah, and I'll just say I'm Julia, by the way. And I'll just say that one of the things that I love too is that about being an indie rep is that, and we have huge territories at IPG. The three of us cover the whole country, which is kind of unheard of. But I get to go to these places that I'm based in Los Angeles, but I get to go to places all over the Western US, which is, I mean, no offense to anyone else, my favorite part of the US. And you know, I get to go figure out what's working in each community, and like even down to the granular level where like in Seattle, what works in Queen Anne, or what works wherever, you know, in what neighborhood in Seattle do certain things work and certain things don't work. That's kind of really cool and fun. And as a person who, you know, I always loved that when I worked at Book Soup in West Hollywood for a long time, you know, finding things to put into people's hands. And in a way, we kind of get to do that on a little bit of a different level than we did at bookstores. And so that's a really great part of our job as well.
Excellent. Yeah. And it's, you know, being an independent publisher, I certainly appreciate that independence that kind of runs through everything that you're talking about as well, because that certainly plays into how we do things also. So obviously the last couple of years have been tough for a lot of sectors of the economy. And we certainly know that independent booksellers have been hit pretty hard through the pandemic as well. But it seems that that capped off a longer trend where independent booksellers were having some struggles in the bigger marketplace. What is the health out there? What are you seeing when you're visiting these bookstores right now? Is it thriving? Do people feel optimistic? Is there a sense of hopefulness as we move forward?
I've been surprised by the lack of stores closing actually over the past few years. And I don't, like Heartland, for instance, the regional that takes place in the Midwest. I mean, they had like an astronomical amount of new first-time stores attending that conference. I think something like, I don't know, at least 40 new stores in that area. So yeah, I think the hustle has gone through the roof, and so it's not like they're you know, having money fights, throwing money at each other. But I feel like because of the sort of community social nature of bookstores, meaning you can go in and talk to a bookseller about, you know, what they're reading and what they recommend. I think it's one of the few remaining sort of in real life social situations anymore. And so and I think also they've really book readers really kind of rallied around them and decided to not order from Amazon anymore. And I think it worked. And so, yeah, we have people reaching out to us that are opening stores, I mean, all the time.
Every day.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, if you'll remember back to the early days of March 2020, you know, Amazon at a certain point was only shipping like sort of quote unquote important products, and stopped shipping books for a while. And I think partially that, and partially like people like me realizing like, or not realizing, but like I remember having a panic that like, oh my God, bookstores are gonna like take a huge hit on this. I think that like a lot of people realized that and realized that they wanted their local stores to survive and shifted buying habits significantly. And so I think a lot of the stories you'll hear actually sold a lot more books during the lockdown, during, you know, whatever has come after that within this pandemic that we're still in. And I feel like sometimes people forget that, but we're still in it. And like, you know, I think that like those, like Chris said, booksellers have had to shift multiple times how they're selling. And I think they probably have more work on their plate than ever before. But I don't worry about the health of the book business itself, I worry about the health of the booksellers sometimes. I hope they're getting vacations and stuff, but the book business itself, they're doing pretty well, and will continue to, as long as people continue shopping with them.
That is great news. Yeah, because you read so much and you hear secondhand, and of course you see other industries really suffering. And so it's just great to know that on the ground there, things are really looking up and that new stores are opening. When you talk about new stores opening, it sounds like each of you are experiencing that in your regions. Are the stores that tend to be opening more general in nature, or more of a specialized booksellers trying to capture niches within their markets?
It really runs the gamut. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of fairly creative takes on it. Sometimes they're, something where they'll be combining a couple of things, like a shop that had historically been a florist shop that's adding a coffee and books section. I've seen a huge growth in bookstore restaurants. And even within that, like there's an outfit out of DC called Busboys and Poets that has many locations, and they seem to be adding more all the time. And they are a full service restaurant with a social justice bookstore attached to them. So general interest, yes, but leaning a little bit more towards certain topics.
Okay.
And yeah, I mean, it's been almost every kind of bookstore imaginable, really. Like, I've got brand new Spanish language bookstores in my territory. I've got children's bookstores, and everything is just kind of it feels like a healthy amount of growth. At the same time, speaking to your previous question, like there's the marketplace is increasingly crowded, so there is more and more of an effort on our part to make sure that our small presses are getting some representation in these stores. So it would be very easy for a new store to lean entirely on the wholesalers, like top 10 picks, or the bestsellers from the big 4.5 or whatever it is we've got now. But yeah,
4.62, yeah.
It really feels like our role to make sure that these stores can be something different in their community, that every independent store isn't stocking the same books by a long shot.
Yeah, on that front, one of the things I notice in the indies that I love the most here in the Midwest, in Chris's territory, are the ones that feel curated, right? Where you feel like the booksellers are to pay special attention to what they carry, and that even if they happen to be in a town with a big box store, they will have a distinguished holding of their books that makes it feel different. So it's a completely different experience. You don't go in there to buy certain books. You go in there because you trust the reputation of the bookseller. Are you seeing that with some of your stores, that notion of highly curated selection and the like?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of my favorite sort of store too. I tend to shut down with like limitless possibilities. It's kind of kind of the same thing with like Spotify or something. Like when you have the whole world and we do in every medium now, right? Like you can get online and order any book that you could ever possibly want. And that's like the exact opposite experience that I'm looking for when I go into a brick and mortar store, is like I need it to be in front of my face. I don't need to, like, I can't wade through a lot of stuff to find it.
Yeah, and in a lot of ways, I think that makes our job, that's like kind of one of the harder parts of our job, is knowing each and every store and what kind of each of their employees is into. But also it's one of the best parts of our job is like getting to know that. And, I have certain stores where it's like, oh, this weird book from this small press in Australia is like putting out, this thing that I know one person at this bookstore is gonna love. And like that kind of thing is like I think for us as sales reps is, like I said, super fun, but also like it means you have to really know your people. And I think they're kind of similar, right? As like I walk into certain stores when I go to sell them books, and I know I'm going to find at least one thing, or their buyer, we're going to be talking and they're going to tell me some book that I haven't heard of yet from some other like small press. And that to me is just like, that's the magic of it, you know?
Yeah, I always get to know the booksellers by asking somebody on staff in almost every store I walk into to say, like, recommend to me a indie press paperback that I've never heard of, or a children's book that is absolutely the weirdest children's book you've got. Which, you know, those are for my niece, but I've got a stack of 20 of those on my
so what is the weirdest children's book that you've ever gotten?
That I've gotten recommended to me, or that I've recommended to other people? Because
that's gotten recommended to you.
There was a kid's poetry book I used to love to recommend to people called The Blood Hungry Spleen.
Oh my God, I need to buy that.
which was a series of poems about the various functions of different organs. And it was quite good. There's a book by a guy named Sean Tan, an Australian illustrator, called Cicada. This is a children's book. It will not sound like one. About a cicada who labors for like 17 years in a cubicle farm, and is mistreated by all of his human coworkers. And then he decides to kill himself. So he jumps off the top of a building, but molts and flies away. It's a beautiful ending.
And David Lynch is making the movie.
Yeah. David Foster Wallace wrote the book, and David Lynch is making the movie.
What was the book that we had, Jeff, that was that kid like trying on different legs?
Oh yeah, Hugo's Runaway Legs from Larrikin. This is, it's a little bit like Nikolai Gogol's The Nose.
Oh sure.
But not at all, because this little boy Hugo wakes up one day, his legs have gone without him. That's where the similarities to Gogol end. And then he has to try on the legs of every creature he encounters on his way to finding his own. So he's on like rabbit legs, frog legs, and they all just fit seamlessly onto his little body. It's very funny picture book.
That's so awesome. I love looking at picture books in bookstores that have like super curated selections.
Mm-hmm.
Do you guys have like a bookstore that you as a reader go to if you like need a new read, but don't like, you kind of want like an impulsive read where maybe it's like on their recommended shelf or something like that, where it's like, I would have not maybe found this on my own, but I trust their curation so much that I'm going to go in and just like know that they're going to pick something good.
100%. Yeah. There's booksellers all over this country who I trust above all others. I don't know. Are we naming names? What are we doing here?
Well, we were trying to get you to name your favorite child, right?
Yeah, I know, right? Or you can just tell us like what one of those books was.
I have a couple. I mean, my local bookstore that's right down the street from me is Skylight Books in Los Angeles. And so they've been my local bookstore since I worked at a different bookstore. And so they're always kind of where I just go and browse and I look at what's new, and they have a great recommend shelf, and they have a great books and translation shelf.
That's Jen Whitty. She's a rock star.
Yeah. And their buyer, Charles, is just like one of the most thoughtful buyers that I really work with. And like always when I come out of those meetings, he's made me think about the books in a way that I like hadn't been before. And then also, and this is by no means am I picking favorites, but just I have great experiences with some of these stores in San Francisco, the Booksmith on Haight Street. I'm going to talk about them a little later when we give our recommendations, but I walked in there once and I picked up Times Square Red, Times Square Blue by Samuel Delany from one of the recommendations on the shelf, which is to this day one of my favorite books and like one of the most fascinating books I have ever read. So I think that of like a lot of books, there's a lot of bookstores I walk in and get recommendations from. Those are the two off the top of my head that I can think of. But I always judge a bookstore by its staff recommend shelf.
Absolutely.
So those are some that have really great ones.
Cool.
I'm really into Exile in Bookville. That is, did they just celebrate 2 years?
Yeah.
I think so.
That's right.
And yeah, they kind of have a little bit of a music bent, which is up my alley. And yeah, I always find stuff in there. And it's pretty full and crowded, but they are really good at Rubik's cubing all of it in a way that makes it pretty enticing.
And
It's
where are
also
they at?
maybe the most beautiful bookstore for like 100 miles in any direction. Like
Yeah,
Exile in Bookville is gorgeous.
they're on Michigan Avenue in Chicago.
Oh, okay.
Cool.
And I've got booksellers who I'll lean on pretty hard for recommendations. Like Josh Cook at Porter Square. And he's actually like a moral voice in book selling. He's got good sensibilities about what we should and could be doing in this industry. Kate Lade at Paper Cuts, also in the Boston area. In New York, Dana Snitsky at Community is the person who sold me The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt, which is like, if you are feeling like maybe you've read a few too many books in your life and maybe you're falling a little bit out of love with books, like that book will cure you. Yeah, in my local shop is a novel idea on Passyunk, just half mile down the road. And it is a very small shop run by a married couple. They've been doing it for 4 years now, not sex, but running the store. And and they
there goes our PG rating.
I'll read from some of our other books later. And they are focused very, very closely on indie press novels and poetry, particularly local stuff. And it's always like a very great place to discover things.
That's really cool. Nice. I am also curious because you guys all have kind of a different perspective of the industry from maybe like the booksellers that I think and librarians that we hear from pretty frequently. Like, what do you see as the role of independent bookstores in like the greater community? Like we talked about the health of the bookstores, but how does the health of the bookstore impact the health of the whole?
I mean, I feel like they're kind of they're all marketing. They're all marketing books and book consumption and, what the books are about. And, I think, I don't know. I think publishing houses they've gotten so used to not really caring about indies when Amazon was making up 40% of many publishers' sales, and I don't think they've caught back on to how to work with them and how to use them to promote their books. So yeah, we've had a lot of success. I mean, we're the first in-house reps in IPG's history, and we've had a lot of success. And I don't think even IPG has really like figured out kind of how to you kind of use that success, leverage that success to promote their books.
I mean,
they get in front of a bunch of eyeballs.
Yeah. Indies are a proving ground for books. Like they are the most discerning readers. These are professional enthusiasts. They see everything, or at least everything we show them, and and they are not shy about telling us what does and doesn't work, what is and isn't good. what people do and do not like. Like they are, you know, the people who actually make us seem smart during sales conference. We are just repeating the pure, like, unfiltered intelligence we're getting off of these booksellers.
And what we're seeing in their stores too, you know.
Yeah.
I would also say, just like, you know, talking about community and what kind of role the indies play within community. I grew up in a very small town in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, and I used to hang out at the bookstore. Like that was where we met. Like we would, you know, I'm old enough that there weren't cell phones, so you had to like pick a meeting spot with all your friends when you were going out in high school, and like we would meet at the bookstore and we would hang out there. And I think that there's like all this other stuff that a indie bookstore really provides to a community. You know, I think about my mom still lives in the town I grew up in, so like how much she sort of interacts with that bookstore, you know, day to day or week to week, on like them bringing people into the community, whether that's, you know, authors or artists or whatever they're bringing in to you know, speak to people, or you know, when they get behind a book, it's like the whole community seems to read that book. And so I think that, like, you know, obviously bookstores fit differently in different places. And like, you know, like I said, my local bookstore, Skylight Books, maybe has a different kind of like role within the neighborhood in Los Angeles that I'm in than this bookstore that I grew up. It's called Bookshop Santa Cruz. I'll say the name, where I grew up. And, you know, I think that like those two stores like fit much differently into each specific community, but that's kind of the point, is like, you know, bookstores sort of like give back to the community in a way that I think, you know, we sort of flirted with finding out how it might be without them, and have been pulling back from the brink of that for a while. So, you know, to me, that's like a pro of, you know, bookstores being successful, is that they do provide such an important service to the communities that they're in.
I like what you said there, Julia, that we flirted with the idea of what the world would be without them. And I feel like we do that, you know, frequently as a culture. Like Americans, we're always flirting with inhumanity and a lack of community. And in so many ways, bookstores are kind of, you know, the stronghold for that in a lot of different places.
Yeah. And when I first started, you know, Barnes and Noble and Borders were the scary places where, you know, this might take away indie bookstores, the success of Barnes and Noble and Borders. And, you know, it very quickly, I mean, I was in the emergency meeting that was called when the Amazon Kindle was announced. There was like an emergency managers meeting at the bookstore I worked at. And I remember, you know, people realizing like, oh, we are screwed. And of course that wasn't entirely true. And, you know, ebooks make up a small percentage of the reading population. And, you know, we kind of skated through that, but you know, there have been threats for a long time to specifically indie bookstores. And I think now indie booksellers would think that Barnes and Noble is vitally important to the book business, in a way that they didn't, you know, 15, 20 years ago.
I used to not, even at Biden, like, you know, 5 years ago, I used to not really say if Barnes and Noble was like bringing in a specific title or like doing well with it, because I didn't want them to be like, well, I give a you know, I don't care. They're the enemy. And now I'm like, you know, I'm like talking about Tokyo Pop and stuff. I'm just like, you know, Barnes and Noble's doing super well with it. And then nobody is like, ew, don't tell me, you know, they're not quite the enemy they once were, is what I'm getting at.
No, they got kicked around a little bit too. And
because they're totally failing. So that makes it easier to
don't tell anybody.
Well, it's, you know, I did a talk at our local indie bookstore about 2 months ago, month and a half ago, on indie bookstores and indie publishers and why we need independence, right? Because indie publishers, we're seeing the same thing. Going back to Jeff's earlier comment of, you know, the consolidation of the industry from the top down as well. And it's like we keep getting to the brink of silly stuff like that. And then realizing, I think it was Charles Johnson, the National Book Award winning author, who noted in an essay he wrote one time that indie publishers are the crucible for publishing. It's like we're the place where the undiscovered voices come from. And then when you flip it to the independent booksellers, those are the places that are also supporting those same undiscovered, new, edgy, those voices that no one's heard of before, right? That aren't getting 7-figure advances and, shopping deals and this, that, and the other merchandise. And it's so important to have that independence running throughout the publishing industry, because without it, we are just a boring culture. So yeah, it's just so refreshing to hear all this.
Well, and I think that indie publishers, I think that the thing that, I don't know if it's being discussed or not. I feel like that's where I kind of, I live in my own little bubble. My friends discuss it, but who knows if anyone else cares. But like that they're doing the work that bigger publishers used to do of really helping authors get their first works out, of helping polish, of helping do all that stuff. You hear these like old school stories of like Harper Lee having to rewrite To Kill a Mockingbird for 2 years, or what, I forget exactly how long it was. And, that was like a big, publisher that was doing that at the time. And now that's all falls to the indie presses. And so, any new voices that you're hearing, even if they're not ever published by an indie press, a lot of like the work that's being done is sort of following the footsteps of the indie presses. So it works in much the same way.
You hear about that happening with agents too. Like they're doing a lot more developmental editing before the books even find their way to those indie presses. Like everything has kind of trickled down into the labor has trickled down into unexpected places. It used to be that there was no difference between bookstores and publishers. Like if you published books, you sold books. And publishers, slowly decided to cut loose what they saw as like the least profitable part of their business. And that turned out to be, a boon to the independence of those stores. Instead of being like just pocket paperbacks from one press, you started to see books alongside of each other. You started to get like this really browsable experience that nobody's figured out how to duplicate elsewhere. Ideas alongside ideas all day long.
Well, before we get to our gift recommendations, Kateri wants to do a lightning round here with you, because I think we just love to hear more book recommendations. Yeah. I think she's been inspired. So I'm going to turn it over to her. I think she's got 4 questions.
I do. So just the first thing that comes to mind.
You don't want to hear that.
Oh, absolutely.
No, I do. Okay, let's start with the coolest book that you own.
I own a signed first edition of Geek Love by Catherine Dunn.
Whoa, that's cool.
That's the coolest book you own?
I think so.
All right. I was going to say, I'm sitting under a lot of my favorites. And, they're definitely not cool. That's my first problem I've got. But this is a long story. Bear with me a moment. There was a brief period of time after the rise of the Nazis and before what Julia? And before,
it's not only is this not a lightning round, but there are Nazis involved. I just am just gonna say it.
Hello. But after the rise of the Nazis and before the publisher Schocken emigrated to the United States, where he had sold the publishing rights to Kafka, to Alfred Knopf in the United States. So I have a Knopf publication of The Castle that had formerly been owned by Morris Phillipson, the director of the University of Chicago Press.
Oh,
cool.
That's just the first thing that jumped out at me off the.
That's what we want. The first thing that jumps out.
Mine would, I think, probably Ed Ruscha's 9 Swimming Pools.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'm super
Sam,
geeked
I
on
want to hear yours too.
The coolest book I own,
yeah,
signed copy of Jazz by Toni Morrison.
All
How
right.
did I not
Hang
know
out
that
with
you
her.
had
Yep. And now you're going to come and steal it from
that?
me.
Can I have it? Okay, next question. Weirdest book that you own?
I mean,
that one's tough.
it depends what's weird, what's cool.
Whatever you define it.
Yeah.
First thing that pops into mind.
The first thing that came to mind is actually here. I'm gonna get up and get it because it's hard to just. Although I can't show it to you. This is a podcast, isn't it? Huh?
Well, it'll be on YouTube also.
Oh, are we being recorded? Holy cow!
Yeah.
All right, I'll stop itching and scratching. But the first book that came to mind was Mycological Forays, which is this gorgeous like slip-covered book that was distributed by DAP, Distributed Art Publishers. And it's ostensibly by John Cage, but they're variations on mushrooms. And I used to be a member of the Mycological Society in New York, which was founded by the composer John Cage. Speaking of Chris's show, John Cage Bubblegum. But it's from a British publisher called Atelier Editions. And it is super, super beautiful. Like they produce some of the most gorgeous books I've ever seen, but it is heavily visual, like combination of John Cage's mushroom themed writings and really beautiful illustrations and photos.
That's cool.
Chris.
Mine would have to be I have a few books by Paul McCarthy, the visual artist. He's from LA, real freaker. He's got a book called Yahoo, that his work is quite often scatological. It's got a hole drilled the whole way through, and there
so delicately put, Chris. So delicately put. There
is a Pinocchio sort of character, lots of melting chocolate throughout. He's hilarious and I love him.
It sounds amazing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if this is the weirdest book itself, but it's kind of a weird, fun story, which is that I have this Mapplethorpe book. It's called Perfection in Form. And it's from an exhibit in Florence that my friend and I randomly walked into one day. My friend and I were in Florence, Italy, and we wanted to go to the Accademia dell'Arte, where the Statue of David is, and there was an exhibit happening of Mapplethorpe photos next to the statues from Michelangelo and some of the other Renaissance sculptors. And I didn't want to buy it because we were backpacking around Italy and it was expensive and I didn't want to carry it. And then I realized that I should have bought it because you couldn't get it anywhere. And then it took me 10 years, but finally I found it at Powell's Books. So it's maybe not the weirdest book in content, but yeah.
I feel like I should have gone with something dirtier. Like I do have an experimental novel called Baby Fucker. It's what it sounds like.
Oh God.
Whatever.
Oh, Sam, do you have a weird book?
I can't even begin to hold a candle to this. No, I simply, because my esoterica is much, it's just much more in line with my general weirdness, like political stuff, like, Soviet military operation manuals from the 1970s, or
that's weird.
The complete transcripts of the Kennedy Nixon debates from 1960, things like that. Yeah, yeah.
If it's just the transcript, Nixon won.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, this is all the debate, not just the debate. This is all of the interactions.
I have this artist book called Night Moves, and it is all of the YouTube comments about Bob Seger's Night Moves. And it's really great. It's really
That's incredible.
Amazing.
Chris wins. Chris wins.
Okay, next up, what is the book that you read the most frequently, like reread the most?
I think
my life,
I think I've reread like 2 books in my life. I'm not a big
Really?
book rereader.
What were the 2 that you reread?
Probably like The Bell Jar and Catcher in the Rye.
Nice.
Man, you're a type. You are a type. I'd say the 2 books I've most reread, maybe 3 if we're going to be a little bit expansive, is like the complete stories of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle, Catch-22 by Joseph Heller, and Foucault's Pendulum by Umberto Eco.
Yeah, I think mine are probably Adrienne Rich's poetry. I think selected poems, but any Adrienne Rich poetry I've read a lot of. And then my favorite book for a long time was The Amazing Adventures of Cavalier and Clay by Michael Chabon. And I reread that quite a few times. It was usurped by Yagiasi's Homegoing as my favorite, all-time favorite novel. But I read Cavalier and Clay quite a lot.
Nice.
Poetry, for sure. I didn't think of that. I've reread, but not novels really much.
Sam?
For leisure, probably Huckleberry Finn. I try to read that about once every year or two. And then just, again, the weirdness of my alternating teaching world, probably On Liberty and Utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. So I teach that book, which means I read that like twice a year. Yeah, so.
Okay.
Nothing like 19th century political philosophy.
Kateri, are you just sitting around reading Hayek in your free time? What's going on?
Well, I've been in like a bad reading slump for like a while, and I just keep picking books that I'm like.
Hence the questions that she's trying to get inspired here.
Trying to find some books to read.
The Last Samurai by Helen DeWitt will fix
I wrote it down.
All right.
I put it on my Christmas list already. And I'm blaming my book club for a lot of this, is they're not good pickers.
Okay, wait. I have a lot of opinions about this. How do you pick books, and what kind of books are being picked?
So we pick a name out of a hat,
okay,
and then somebody picks it, and then everybody reads it, and that's it.
And is it like, what kind of books?
We need to like hone things in, but there's like a very large breadth. Like the last book that I really loved was a book club book, and it was Lonesome Dove. But then we picked another book that I'm not going to name because I didn't like it. And the one before that, I also
books aren't the problem. Your friends are the problem.
They are. Well, the issue is that they're not my friends; they're my family, and I can't kick them out of book club.
So I've run a book club for over 10 years, and I used to teach a workshop on running book clubs. So I do 4 books, 2 fiction, 2 nonfiction. And then they get to do something that my mother called it. It was called Chicago voting, which means you vote as many times as you want
early and often until you pick one book. So I'm just going to say that is one of the ways that I think book clubs, and then I have a personal philosophy. I know everyone's taste. I don't pick books over 400 pages. I don't pick classics. I don't like, this isn't school. I don't like, I have a very like specific like thing.
Yeah, no, I think we need a change, because nobody, at least 3/4 of the people in book club don't like the book. And then it's like, they don't finish reading it and there's no discussion, and it's like it's not a good system. So I'm going to be using yours from now on.
Yeah, please take it and run with it. Please.
I like to build book clubs around single books and then never meet again. So, I have, when I was a bookseller, there was a book on climate change that I was horrified by. I liked it so much, and it gave me like a 7-month anxiety attack. But it was called The Uninhabitable Earth by David Wallace Wells. And I just collected 10 people who I knew had purchased the book and invited them to be in a book club. We met once over dinner in one of their homes. There were 10 bottles of wine. They were all empty at the end. We had a great time, and I never saw those people again.
No, it's great. It's like a salon.
Kind of. I'm planning something similar with one of our books by the Strugatsky brothers, The Uninhabited Island, where we're going to meet at the penny slots at Rivers Casino at midnight.
That's either a book club or a cult, Jeff, that you're starting.
I've been inviting people who are mostly performance artists.
Uh-oh. A cult. Yeah. I'm getting it. Yeah.
That Chicago Review Press does the Strugatsky brothers, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Yeah, I love Stalker. Got a couple of their others that I think Melville House picked up a couple of their other books.
They did for their Never Sink series, but yes. Melville House has a bad habit of letting shit go out of print.
Yeah, Never Sink, and yet
Never Sink, but it sunk sometime ago.
Yeah. Well, this is definitely the most fascinating podcast we have had, and I mean that in the best sense of the word. This has just been wonderful. And now, we've been talking about books, but now let's get to the holiday portion of it. A great holiday book recommendation, and I think the deal here is a book maybe that you're thinking of giving to people this year or have in recent years. Doesn't have to be a Christmas themed book, but just something that you just love to give as a gift, just because it's a universal book, or it's a book you just love a lot and think other people like it.
I picked 3. I told you I was going to.
That's okay.
And so the first one I picked is from this publisher called Sunset and Venice, and it's called Los Angeles Restaurants. And I found it at Pages Manhattan Beach. And it is the most beautiful book. It's so pretty. It's got all these great LA restaurants. I want to buy it for people that aren't even in Los Angeles, because it's so cool and so beautiful, and just beautiful photographs. And it's on beautiful paper, and it's got this weird cool binding and stuff. I don't know. It's a great gift book. And then the second is it's an IPG book. It's called The Rite of Spring. And it is this book by Gillian Moore. It's about the orchestral piece, The Rite of Spring. And literally, I didn't know this, but apparently when it first was played in 1913, it caused a riot in the Paris Opera House. And it's the history of this piece, that of course a lot of us know from Fantasia, Disney's Fantasia. Parts of it were adapted for that. And it's just such a cool book about this work of art that I just really loved. And I listened to The Rite of Spring the other day while I was working, and I hadn't listened to it in a long time, and it's so intense that I had to turn it off because I was I cannot work to this. There's no way. And then finally, this one was recommended to me by Camden at the Booksmith. It's called We Both Laughed in Pleasure, The Selected Diaries of Lou Sullivan, 1961 to 1991. And Lou was a trans activist and was really big in AIDS activism in the Bay Area, and ended up dying of AIDS. But it's just it's his diaries, and it's just a great book, really great queer sort of history. And I'm really into collecting the sort of scraps of queer history that we get. And so those are my recommendations.
Nice.
Excellent.
I didn't even know we could pick 3. What?
We always break the rules.
Obviously, there's no rules on this podcast.
I didn't know it was supposed to be about gifting, so I just picked some that I was into.
Let's hear about those, Chris.
Well, so I just was in Detroit and got to visit Third Man Records, and they also have a publishing arm that's through Consortium. And I'm not even a big Jack White fan, but I really like the books that he's publishing. He just did one about Flying Nun record company that It's called Needles and Plastic, Flying Nun Records, 1981 to 1988. Bunch of really cool bands on that label. One is the lead singer of The Clean, who just died like 2 days ago. So yeah, super into all of those books about music. We've got Omnibus Press at IPG. They're doing these books by year on David Bowie. There's 3 now, starting with 1970. They also did a book.
Say the title, Chris. Say the title.
Oh, Bowie Odyssey, 70, 71, and 72. They also did a book on Mudhoney from Seattle. And then non-IPG stuff. This just came out. It's called Fingers Crossed. It's from the lead singer of Lush, 90s band. And I read before I read the book that you would be into this book even if you didn't care about the band, and it's totally true. She had a really crazy upbringing. Her mom was a Japanese model who was in a couple James Bond movies, and her dad was a crazy Hungarian. Very interesting life. Always into the 33 and a third series.
Great series.
I think I probably got this from Exile, actually, Exile in Bookville. And then Nina Simone's Gum by Warren Ellis. This is, I think, from Faber and Faber in the UK anyway. Nick Cave curated this music festival, of which Nina Simone, it was one of Nina Simone's last performances. She came out chewing gum, as she did when I saw her in Chicago, and stuck it like to the piano. And Warren Ellis, who is in Nick Cave's band, ran up and took it when she left and has been carrying it around with him in her handkerchief that she like wiped her brow with.
Wow.
And it's sort of about that obsessiveness.
That is not a choice I would make.
Yeah. And then this book, New York 1962 to 1964, is a show at the Jewish Museum that I think just closed. And it's like, it's so chock full, it'll take me a good year to get through this. And it's about everything in that time period, like music, politics, movies, really kind of everything. And I'll stop because that was more than 3.
All good suggestions, though.
Yeah.
A bit of a side note. Chris, you mentioned the 33 and a thirds, and we've had this conversation. But Sam, Kateri, if you were going to write a 33 and a third, what album would you pick?
Ooh, that is a hard question.
Joni Mitchell's Blue.
Oh,
that's a good
perfect.
I wonder if there is one. There might be one.
I would bet that there is one. Yeah, I have several of those 33 and a thirds. I love those.
I might have to do a Van Morrison, maybe Into the Mystic, because that's what I grew up listening to. So there's like a lot of nostalgia there.
So nostalgia is good stuff.
Yeah.
Julia, you got one?
It would have to be the Get Up Kids Something to Write Home About, which did not leave my car stereo for an entire year after it came out when I was a senior in high school. So
I was gonna say, was your car stereo broken? Because mine. No, I had a friend who had Donovan stuck in her car stereo indefinitely. It's the only thing she could listen to.
No.
I would do Operation Ivy's Energy.
That's a good one.
Anyone.
I would do the Human League Dare.
Oh, nice.
Too. Yeah.
The single book that I had initially selected, unlike these two overachievers and clowns, it was Milkier Pigs and Violet Gold, which I have. It is one of the books that we are selling. It's from Marshall Cavendish, a press out of Singapore. And I ordered a sample copy of it, and I have fallen completely in love with it. This is the second edition of it. It is a wildly popular Filipino cookbook by a Southeast Asian food writing rock star named Brian Coe. He also owns a bakery but this one is, it's a cookbook, of course, and like frankly, I'm not going to cook most of these things. I don't have access to them. I don't want a cuisine that's centered around Spam most of the time, but it is full of cultural context and personal stories and these gorgeous vignettes and just like an amazing sense of place. And it's also kind of a classic already, like for folks who are interested in this area. So I'd say it's very much worth getting and reading, whether you're cooking from it or not. And as a little bonus, I thought of the book that I have most gifted. And it is an old like 1920s thriller called The Madonna of the Sleeping Cars. And it was last published, interestingly, I think, by Melville House in the Neversink series, and it's totally unavailable now because they suck at that. But it's by a guy named Maurice de Cobra. I hesitate to say that's probably not his his given name, de Cobra, but it is a brilliant little like Orient Express thriller about like espionage and a certain kind of like early 20th century like high class intrigue that you don't really find in books anymore. Cool. Very, very entertaining. It's all about, like the rise of the Soviet Union as a power, the wealth, like the historic like wealth and class structures in the UK, like all very entertainingly placed.
Oh, nice.
I've given that to like probably a dozen people over the last few years. Several years.
How about you, Kateri?
Well, so I have like two types of friends. I have the type of friends who I have to convince that they actually like literary writing and they don't like pop fiction. And to them, I think this year I'm giving this to 3 different people. It's the, let me make sure I'm getting the title right here. Spy of the First Person by Sam Shepard. It was his last book. It's a really small, thin book, but it is super creepy and haunting. And the prose is incredible. Yeah. And it like spans all of these different places. I think it goes from like Arizona to New Mexico to New York. And it's kind of about memory and recollection. But just the prose alone is like, it doesn't even matter what it's about, but the prose makes it completely worth it. And then I have the other set of
novel format.
Yeah, it's fiction. And it's probably like maybe 120 pages or something. It's super short, but really, really, really good. And I'm giving that to the folks who are like, oh, I only read like pop fiction and stuff that has a plot. And I was like, oh, no, you don't. I'm giving you something else. And then the other book that I give a lot of times to people who I don't know what to gift is Wintering by Catherine May, because it's just beautiful. And I think that it's relevant and it's something that people don't talk about, is these like lulls in our life where things aren't going as planned, but we are often like fighting against that, and how the earth teaches us to not do that and like hibernate and just be for a while. And I like that. I like giving that book in winter. So those are my picks. How about you, Sam?
So I'll just, because everyone's doing more than one, you prepare one. So every year I pick a book that I really enjoyed that past year, and then I buy a bunch of those and give them out to folks. So last year I did this book called On Consolation: Finding Solace in Dark Times by Michael Ignatieff. Ignatieff is a political thinker, a former member of the Canadian Parliament. But what he does, it's just a beautiful, beautiful book, is he goes back through history and looks at how various historical figures have dealt with challenging times in history and how they've kind of come out of it. And it's just beautifully rendered. It's not a very long book. It's very readable. It's a great book for book groups because there's a lot to unpack and discuss. And he's a beautiful writer too. He's done some wonderful things over the years. And then this year, I'm doing one of my recent favorite books. It was a book that my wife actually gave to me a couple of years ago that I'd never heard about, and I just cherish this book. It's The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd. And this is a book that is published by Canongate over in the UK. It's a book about the Cairngorm Mountains in Scotland, so the giant mountains in the middle of Scotland. But it's a natural history, but it's so much more than that. It's also a very short book, and it's this woman who just goes out into this mountain landscape and observes and writes about what she sees and how she feels and how she interacts with the world. It was written, several decades ago. But what is beautiful about it is it just shows how you can pick this one little plot of land and really get to know that area, and then just really dive deep into the biome of that region, and just tell that story. And in so doing so, you're telling such a bigger story about humans and the planet and our interaction with nature and how we exist both in nature and outside of nature. It's just an absolute beautiful book. Robert Macfarlane, the great British natural history writer, did a foreword for this edition. But yeah, it's just a terrific one. That's 170 pages or so. You read it in an afternoon, and it just makes you feel good and interested, and you just it unpacks the brain. So yeah, that's this year's gift. I hope none of my giftees are listening to the podcast. Well, this was fun and much longer than I had promised you all, but very, very enjoyable. I think we probably had 100 book recommendations on this one all told, and a lot of really interesting conversation, a lot of fun stuff as well. So I thank all of you for joining us today. This was great. I hope you enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Excellent.
Thursday afternoon, I can recall.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and happy holidays.
You as well, Sam.
Bye, everybody.
I'll take care.